So, we're in June. What you're hoping for from a bee point of view is a massive pollen-bearing, nectar-bearing flowers. And I think we can improve that considerably. Now, the other thing is that doesn't necessarily mean that short mown grass is necessarily bad for some species, but not on these bits here, unfortunately, because these are quite wet. For some species, short mown grass is actually quite good because it ends up being quite thin and you get a lot of bare earth and you get the mining bees, which are really quite exciting. These are the ones you see up on the moors by footpaths, and they are solitary, but they kind of are sort of colonial. You get a whole bunch, a bit like sand martin nests and a sandbank. So they are also very important, but at the moment I'm not necessarily seeing much habitat of that sort here, so we need to think about what might we do to improve that. The other thing is to think about the life cycle of bees. What is it that they require? So we want to see bees coming to pollen, to flowers, yes, and you want that through as long a part of the season as possible. So you're looking to get your early flowers, which obviously are things like the typical spring bulbs and stuff of that nature, but then you want waves upon waves of massed flowers right the way through the year, finishing with things like ivy in more peripheral areas. That's one of the better ones for late nectar and pollen. So ivy, when it's flowering in October, November, will be absolutely full of insects because there's not much else available at that time. So we need to think about how we can improve that aspect of the park and the garden. Some of these things are actually quite straightforward, and I'm trying to look at what we've got. I don't know if that's a big standard Cotoneaster there, and I've got a feeling there's a Cotoneaster over there from memory. They are brilliant for bees and other insects. They will, if you stand under them, they will actually be humming with insect life. In terms of trees, again, trees, we often forget about the flowers on trees, but they can be very, very important, both for hay fever sufferers, but also for producing insects and therefore for supporting bird life. So the common lime, which is a hybrid small leaf, large leaf lime that's often planted, is one of the controversial street trees because it drips honeydew. So the honeydew on the one hand can be a pain if your car's underneath it, but that is actually telling us that they are producing a huge amount of insect biomass which can be fed upon by blue tits and willow warblers and whatever else. So we need to think about all these different things that we can do. The Cotoneasters come in many different forms, and you get the lovely flowers, you get the bees, you get the berries later in the year. You also get cover. And you can get, from horizontalis, you can get them up surfaces, you can get them as small bushes, and you can get them as quite large bushes or small trees. So that gives plenty of scope. You can also grow things up surfaces. So when you're gardening, you need to think in 3 dimensions. So you need to think about habitat not just as the space, but also as the actual volume. So that becomes very, very important. So what else do our bees need? Well, 2 main things. One is that they need nesting sites, and they tend to be, mostly for the bumblebees, they tend to be round about the ground floor in rough bits of vegetation, such as, I hope no one's been weeding these recently, but for example the borders here would probably be quite, some patches there that are probably quite good bumblebee nesting habitat. You can enhance that by adding things like rockery stones, or I often use things like broken pots, for instance, because you can, if you've got a big pot and it's broken, don't chuck it out, put it so the remaining pot is on top, and you've got the hole and you've got a nice nest site under there, and then just cover that with some brush or rubbish or whatever, or a bit of soil. That will quite often end up being a bumblebee nest. So in terms of habitat, you need to think about where they're going to nest. Some will be on the ground, some will be higher up. So if there's a site up and it looks like it's been nicely mortared, so that's no good. You need to get them to take a bit of mortar out. There are some holes maybe in that one there. That's probably be ideal for tree bee. And there's 1 or 2 others that will nest higher up. they will often use things like old mouse holes. So if you can find where a wood mouse has been, the bees will often take over the wood mouse nest and things like that. And they're very docile, but I think mammals find them a bit of a nuisance, so they tend to be put off. So that's a nesting site. So if we're going to get bees, we need bee nests, we need nesting sites. You also need overwintering places, and again this is where you need to, at the end of the year, to have some nice secluded rough areas like where the stones are down there, and maybe a place where you've left piles of brush and stuff like that, and that's where the queen bees can overwinter, and they'll generally get down to the base of a bundle of vegetation, a bundle of brush, or at the base of, say, a tall grass. And we talked previously about bringing management out into the grass a bit where appropriate and actually widening some of the borders. Well, this is part of the logic behind that. You want to leave some bits, some bits are mown maybe once a year, some bits twice a year, some bits every couple of weeks. But you also need some bits which are left right the way through the winter, because that's where the bees will be overwintering. If they don't overwinter, they can't nest the next year. If there's no habitat for nesting, they can't nest. If you've not got either of those, you're not going to get your bees. So that's the sort of logic behind it. Here you can look, we've got honeybees going absolutely ballistic in that flower, and there's a bumblebee just flown off as well. So as soon as we've got this mass of flowers in the right situation, you can feel the warmth, then the bees are doing really well. So we need to think about how do we make sure that we've got this sort of habitat right the way through the year, and how do we utilise any other areas which may not be fully utilised at the minute. Now, one thing I'm not seeing at the moment is any buddleia. Don't know if we've got any. And there could be in the sort of rougher corners, if you've got a nice sunny spot, or around the car park, be quite easy to just plant up some buddleia, because it's crazy that you actually can buy it from a garden centre, because all you do with buddleia is break a bit off and stick it in the ground. And the trick with buddleia is that you want it in flower for as long as possible through the year. So you're looking at some spots where it's very sunny early, and then other spots where it's sunny a bit later in the year. So you want to actually spread the season as much as you can. But also you want to make sure you've got some bushes in flower when it's in flower, which will be in the next few weeks starting, and then really through into August. You want to make sure that there's somewhere in flower in full sun for as much of the day as possible. So you need to have them in different spots. So you need to think about your garden, think about where the sun is, and then think, oh right, I'll have a couple there. Then, where's it sunny at 2 o'clock? I'll have a couple there. So it's that kind of plan. This is really good because this will carry on flowering. You can extend the flowering period, obviously, by deadheading some of it, if anyone is really keen to do that. But you can see here, these are nice open flowers, they're simple flowers, masses of stamens, so loads and loads of pollen, and the bees are loving it. But there's obviously a lot of foxgloves, and they're good for pollinators as well. In fact, you can see the bees going in there. So again, I tend to go with what nature likes, and I would think, well, at the back end, just get some seed and scatter more foxgloves, so it's a bit more, you can get massed foxgloves. If they like it here, then that's a good place to do it. The other thing here is that you've got some really nice habitat, because this is the sort of stuff that your bees will like. So we've got the hypericum as well, so again, lots of flowers on here. What you can do, and I would be going around the garden looking at opportunities for this, where you've got walls of this sort, that is crying out for things like marjoram, which will be flowering in, again, it'll be starting this month and then for a good while up into September. And that is fantastic for hoverflies, bumblebees, honeybees. They're just fantastic, and for butterflies. They're really, really good. And the other one, again, easy to grow and it will self-seed, is the red valerian, which is again very, very nice. And these ones which will, if you get a good summer, sort of July, August, you can get things like hummingbird hawk moths will come to that, so the day-flying moths will come to those. So that's worth it. And
a lot
it does, it seeds in very nicely, it's very attractive, and again you just deadhead it and it'll cut and come again. And the other plant which is really fantastic is Verbena Urbane. So that is fantastic for pollinators, and it'll bring the butterflies in, it'll bring the day-flying moths in. And here, again, it's a nice shelter spot. All these insects like shelter and they like sun, so the more sun, the better. And the advantage you've got with the hedges, so someone might look at a yew hedge and say, well, it's not terribly biodiverse, but it's actually a very good feature of the habitat. It'll provide nesting sites for birds, nesting sites for the bees, and they are probably quite good particularly for house sparrows, roosting in them. Some of the best, I mean that beech hedge is a little bit tight, but some of the best house sparrow roost sites I know of are in people's front gardens in beech hedges. And you go past and you can just hear them all twittering away because they're very sociable and very interactive. So I will be looking at opportunities for, okay, well, maybe not disturb that because that's going to be a good nesting place. Where are the corners that you can make, leave it a little bit untidy, maybe put the brush pile down and things like that. But then also thinking of easy things to enhance the habitat. And I say things like valerian, marjoram, which will then self-colonise or self-seed and they will spread. The foxgloves, I think, these will all provide loads and loads of seeds, so wait till they've ripened. Don't bother deadheading them because they are, I can never remember which way around the word is, they live for 2 years, so they grow from biennials. Yeah. If you deadhead them, you've lost the seeds. Yes. So leave the seeds. The tidiness in us wants to go and. Yeah. But generally, the plant will die having flowered. So leave it to set seed and then spread the seeds where you want them. So there's areas down there where you could, again, just make sure that you can get plenty of seeds down into that. The other one which some people do regard as a bit of a weed is the purple toe flax, which is a South African thing which you get on urban disturbed sites. But it is a garden plant. Again, it's self-set and it's very, very good for pollinating insects. So once you've got that, it will kind of flower and flower and flower. Okay, one of the other plants which is really useful because you're trying to spread the flowering season, or one of the other groups of plants are the ericas. So, as you come up the main driveway, there's beds of ericas. Why not make those bigger? Add some more to them. There's mown grass. A lot of the mown grass in those places has very little purpose. So some of the ericas are really good. And they provide a lot of very early, really good habitat for pollinators. And the other thing, it's a garden, so it needs to look attractive, it needs to look pretty as well. So that's quite good in terms of possible habitat. You may have a problem here because obviously when you're gardening, you may want to get rid of the creeping buttercup. So it's just one of those things. It's a really nice flower, it's nice for insects, but it can be a pernicious weed in a garden border. So you maybe need to think about that. This area here, for example, I guess it's got early bulbs coming through, but there's lots of opportunity there for the foxgloves or the other species we talked about to seed those in. And you've got all this fantastic habitat here. This is really good stuff. The other species that might utilise this are birds like wren. So they will roost here in winter, and they'll also use them as nesting sites. So again, it's worth bearing that in mind. So two things which would grow really well here, and again provide lots of flower, lots of pollen, etc. Yellow corydalis. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know the one I mean, don't you? Now that I think is a bit weird because once it's growing, it grows like there's no tomorrow. If you try transplanting it, it doesn't like it.
I'll try that.
I don't understand it. So whether you have to seed it in or not, I don't know. But this would be a very nice wall to get that and the ivy leaf toe flax, along with the what would you say it was, Corsican? Yeah. So that, you know, there's an opportunity there to enhance the visual impact, but also make really good habitat. So that's what we're thinking about. And you can see the bottoms of the hedges. Again, there's probably places where you can leave a little bit of untidiness for the bees and for the winter, etc., etc. With the grassland, if it's short mown, there is the possibility that you're going to get some opportunities for mining bees, but I can't see anything here at the moment. There's plenty of bits of bare ground, but the mining bees tend to like dry, more sandy soil, so that may be a limit here. If you go into Weston Park and go onto the short mown grass in Weston Park, then you find lots of little burrows of mining bees, and they tend to leave a little hole in a little pile of soil that they've dug out. The obvious places here would be down at the bottom edge, but the trouble is there's that spring line we talked about the other night, which makes that very, very wet, so that's unsuitable. But it would be worth checking all the grass areas just to see, are there any places where we've got opportunities for mining bee colonies? And then if there aren't, you are in the business of maybe thinking about bug boxes, which we have talked about before. And that might be that you can talk nicely to, you know, Mr. B&Q or Mr. Homebase or one of the local garden centres and see if they will donate some. You can get some of these things now for £2 or £3, quite sophisticated ones from places like B&M. At one point they used to be like 25 quid a throw. Well, you can get them for nothing. But there are also ones that you can actually make very, very easily. You just need a bundle of basically tubular sticks, and you bundle them up together and you can make a bug box. Not specific to particular plants, so as long as there's plants which are producing nectar and pollen, then they're going to be okay. Yeah. So the butterflies are often specific to food plants for the larvae. They'll feed on anything, which, you know, why they feed on buddleia, for example. So the adults are feeding on nectar-rich flowers, but the larvae are very specific because the larvae are herbivorous, and generally they require certain species. So if you get the ones that do well at the moment when we have a hot summer are what we call the Vanessa butterflies, which are the peacocks, the painted ladies, red admiral, tortoiseshell, etc., etc. And they are very cosmopolitan, and the larvae mainly feed on nettle, and there's plenty of nettles. Although I haven't seen many nettle patches in the park. So have we got any nettles in any sunny patches? Yeah. So you might want to think about a nice sunny corner where you can have your nettle patch, because that will get your peacocks, your red admirals and the rest of it. And nettles are brilliant for a whole host of other insects.
Oh, it's funny.
So this is why we're looking at the wider area, because we want to get the habitat right in here. There's a lot we can do to enhance the habitat here, but then you want to cast around to other opportunities in the wider landscape. So if we want the nettle patches, I'm sure there are places along Rycroft Glen where you could get nettles doing quite well. I'm sure there's places on the far side that wouldn't. Yeah. So, you know, we need to be thinking about things like the butterflies, and, you know, today we're not seeing very many, and I would expect more. You know, it's not the peak yet, but we are getting I was out on site in the East Riding last week, and we were getting peacocks and red admirals and stuff like that coming in. The red admirals are migrating in from the continent, they're arriving. I didn't see any painted ladies, but I would expect them to be following. So you want to get the habitat right, but it's a matter of then looking both in the park, but also looking beyond the park at what we can do, what we can do to enhance the wider habitat. Okay. Any questions so far?
So it's almost a matter of talking to the neighbours and getting them to...
Yeah,